On July 1st, 2013, at 2 a.m., a woman named Choy Soo-mi, around 30 years old, along with her husband Mr. Jung, arrived at the Hwaseong police station in Gyeonggi province to report the disappearance of her twin sister, Choy Hae-won. The last time they had any contact with her was on June 26th, around 1:40 p.m. At that time, Hae-won had sent a short text message: "I will be traveling until the 30th. After that, they received no further communication from her. They immediately tried calling her, but her phone was turned off. At the same time, Hae-won's white Mercedes had also disappeared. Initially, her younger sister assumed that Hae-won had driven off on a trip and continued to wait. However, when June 30th came and went, Hae-won still had not returned home, and her phone remained off. The police then checked her phone records, travel logs, and bank transactions to track her whereabouts. They found that she had not left the country, nor had she made any credit card transactions or cash withdrawals. In reality, 5 days before disappearing, Hae-won had liquidated the store she ran with her sister. 2 days before she vanished, Hae-won had received a settlement payment of 40 million won. That meant she disappeared right after receiving a large sum of money. While reviewing her phone activity, police discovered that her phone had been briefly turned on once on the morning of June 27th, the day after she sent the message about going on a trip. She had sent a text message to her boyfriend. At the time, Hae-won had been dating a man for about 4 months. The police reached out to her boyfriend, the last person to receive contact from her. He told them, "I lost contact with Choy Hae-won, and I'm very worried." Then, he revealed something unexpected. The final text message he received on June 27th seemed unusual. Normally, his girlfriend used affectionate language and had a habit of ending her sentences with 2 periods. However, the tone of the last message was completely different from usual. This raised suspicion. Was the message sent by someone else? And if so, did something happen to Hae-won on the morning of the 27th? On one hand, the police focused on tracking Hae-won's car. They discovered that on June 26th, at 12:27 p.m. before her final text was sent, a nearby highway CCTV camera captured her car. The problem was that the person in the driver's seat was not Choy Hae-won, it was a different man. The passenger seat was empty. So, where did Hae-won go? As more questions arose, the police noticed something unusual. The man in the CCTV footage was exceptionally large. Normally, in CCTV footage, the driver's seat is clearly visible along with the person sitting in it. However, this man was so tall and broad that the driver's seat was completely obscured. As they continued tracking the car, they discovered that the driver had changed just 1 day later. At 7:26 p.m. on June 27th, Hae-won's car entered a public parking lot in Hwaseong City, about 9 miles from her home. Then, at 2:15 a.m. on June 28th, the car left the parking lot. This time, a different man was seen on camera. He was wearing a white t-shirt, had a slimmer build compared to the man from the previous day, paid the parking fee with a credit card, and drove away. The police immediately checked the credit card records and quickly identified the individual. It was a man named Song Min-jae, around 20 years old. He had no connection to Hae-won. More specifically, he worked at a used car dealership. It turned out that on June 27th, the owner of the used car dealership had loaned money to someone and received Hae-won's Mercedes as collateral. Song Min-jae, as an employee, had been sent to retrieve the car. The police then went to the dealership owner to gather more information. According to Song Min-jae's boss, a friend had urgently needed 12 million won and had put up the Mercedes as collateral. The deal was that the friend received 6 million won in cash, and the remaining amount was transferred via bank account. If the money wasn't repaid by July, ownership of the car would be transferred. However, while speaking with the police, Song Min-jae's boss revealed a crucial piece of information. Before the police arrived, he had received a phone call from the friend who had given him the car. The caller sounded extremely nervous and said, "Hey, that car I gave you, don't use it for a few days. Hide it somewhere or just leave it in a corner. Hey, cover it with a sheet." It was clear that this person was trying to conceal something. The dealership owner provided everything to the police, including the loan agreement and bank transaction details. The loan agreement was dated June 26th, which coincided exactly with the day Hae-won disappeared. Even more suspicious was the wording on the document. It explicitly stated, "Mercedes belonging to my sister-in-law." This meant that the person who sold the car was Jong, the husband of Hae-won's younger sister, the same man who had gone to the police station to report her missing. Additionally, the money transferred by the used car dealer was confirmed to have been sent to Jong's bank account. Ah, so it's him. But when the police identified the suspect, they were shocked, because his name was one that any basketball fan from the 2000s would recognize. He had once been a rising basketball star and had led South Korea to victory at an international basketball tournament in Malaysia in the late 2000s. His name was Sang-heon. He was the one who had sold the car. For those unfamiliar with Sang-heon, he was a phenomenal point guard standing at 6 feet 4 inches, with natural speed and an outstanding shooting ability. But despite his immense talent, his behavior was far from professional. He skipped practices, partied all night, drank heavily, and smoked. He was reckless, uncontrollable, and barely fit the image of a professional athlete. At one point, his weight ballooned past 220 pounds, and he completely failed to maintain his physical condition. At the time, Sang-heon was part of Korea University's basketball team, but due to his poor attitude, he was not well regarded even among his own teammates. His relationship with the team deteriorated, and his coach lost patience with him. But nothing changed. It seemed like Sang-heon had no real interest in a long-term basketball career. Eventually, he dropped out in his third year, seemingly quitting basketball for good. However, at the time, a few teams still believed in his talent and decided to give him another chance. In 2005, Sang-heon made a return to professional basketball. He joined the Goyang Orions through the rookie draft. But did he change? No, he remained irresponsible. He skipped practice and spent more time at bars than on the basketball court. Once, he claimed he was injured during training and disappeared without permission for 3 weeks. Because of Sang-heon, team morale plummeted, and the team viewed him as a troublemaker. Even though he had natural talent, they could no longer ignore his lack of discipline. Ultimately, just 7 months after joining, the team cut him. Then, in 2006, Jong Sang-heon transferred to Ulsan Mobis. He continued his basketball career and seemed to put in more effort. The following year, Ulsan Mobis won the league championship. Considering this, some believe that Sang-heon undoubtedly had talent. Meanwhile, in 2007, Sang-heon married his longtime girlfriend, Choy Soo-mi, who was a year older than him. They had been dating for 3 years. She was the younger sister of the missing victim. He continued his basketball career and his married life, but his reckless lifestyle persisted. His lack of self-discipline and obsession with partying led to his downfall. After tolerating his behavior for too long, the team finally terminated his contract. By 2009, his basketball career ended in disgrace, and 4 years later, in 2013, Sang-heon became the prime suspect in today's murder case. 6 days after Choy Hae-won disappeared on July 2nd, the police summoned Sang-heon as a witness. However, he denied everything and claimed, "I never even drove my sister-in-law's car." Is that so? The police then showed him the CCTV footage captured near the house and the bank transaction records from the used car dealer. The evidence was undeniable. Faced with this, Sang-heon quickly changed his story. "Okay, yes, I sold my sister-in-law's car, but I didn't hurt her. My wife kept nagging me for living expenses, so I stole and sold the car. My sister-in-law said she was going on a trip, so I just borrowed the car. I needed money urgently, that's all." But this was another lie. Hae-won texted her family at 1:40 p.m. on June 26th, saying she was going on a trip. However, CCTV footage showed Sang-heon driving the Mercedes at 12:27 p.m., about an hour before that message was sent. This meant Sang-heon already knew that Hae-won would never use the car again before her message was even sent. In other words, he knew she was already dead. So where did the crime take place? And more importantly, where was the victim's body? The police suspected that Sang-heon had used his car to dispose of the body, so they conducted a forensic examination. Sang-heon initially agreed to cooperate, but when they searched the car, it was spotless. It was as if he had erased all evidence. A strong scent of disinfectant hit the investigators' noses. Could they still find any clues? The police thoroughly inspected the inside and outside of the vehicle. Finally, they discovered 3 small bloodstains in the trunk. It was unclear who the blood belonged to, but the police confronted Sang-heon. "We found bloodstains in the trunk of your car. Are you still going to lie?" His arrogant and confident demeanor began to crumble. His eyes trembled, and then he started revealing the details of the crime. After retiring in disgrace in 2009, Sang-heon became unemployed overnight and soon relied on his wife's family's wealth to survive. The money he had earned during his basketball career was gone. However, he still hadn't learned his lesson and squandered their apartment deposit on an extravagant lifestyle. Eventually, when he ran out of money and had nowhere else to live, he moved into his in-laws' house in Hwaseong, Gyeonggi Province. He claimed, "I tried running a business selling scrap cars and unregistered vehicles, but I didn't make any real income." On the other hand, Hae-won despised Sang-heon. Despite his pride in his past success, he was useless and obsessed with partying. Naturally, this caused her younger sister to suffer, so Hae-won advised him, "Shouldn't you get a proper job and make money?" But her sister defended her husband. In the end, Hae-won even found a job for him. One might think this was something to be grateful for. However, Sang-heon saw the situation differently. He felt that his sister-in-law was looking down on him. He complained, "She's not even married, yet she acts like some bitter old single woman lecturing me." In reality, he had once been a successful basketball player, but now he was a failure, living off his in-laws. This deeply wounded his pride. As a result, he became hypersensitive to any comments from his sister-in-law about making money or getting a job. Eventually, their relationship deteriorated, and arguments broke out constantly. To make matters worse, Hae-won recently closed the store she had been running with her younger sister. This only intensified the situation. 2 days before the crime, on June 24th, her younger sister asked Hae-won to share part of the 40 million won in compensation money she had received. But Hae-won firmly refused. This enraged Sang-heon. He became obsessed with the idea that Hae-won was hoarding money that belonged to their family. On the day of the crime, June 26th, Sang-heon pretended to go to work, saying, "I'm heading out." But it was a lie. He silently monitored the situation from the parking lot of a nearby store. As family members left one by one for work, he called them to confirm that no one was home. By 11 a.m., only Hae-won remained in the house. Sang-heon returned home and started a heated argument with his sister-in-law about the money. Hae-won refused to back down, demanding to know why it was their money in the first place. As the argument escalated, Hae-won snapped in anger and shouted, "Yeah, I never got married because I was afraid of ending up with losers like you." Sang-heon exploded in rage at her words. He felt humiliated and belittled, and lost control. He lunged at Hae-won and strangled her. As a former athlete, Sang-heon's strength was overwhelming. Hae-won stood no chance against the massive man attacking her. In the end, she died without being able to resist. When Choy Hae-won's body collapsed, Sang-heon finally came to his senses. Though shaken, he quickly took action to cover up the crime. First, he placed the body into a suitcase and put it in the trunk of his car. Then, to make it seem like Hae-won had gone on a trip, he sent a text message to her family. Later, while thinking about what he could turn into cash, he remembered Hae-won's Mercedes. Without hesitation, he contacted a dealer and pawned the car for a loan. The next morning, on June 27th, Sang-heon realized that his sister-in-law had a boyfriend. So he turned on her phone and sent a text message to him. Then, he left the house to deal with the body in his car. By then, the body had started decomposing, and a foul odor was spreading from the car. If things continued this way, it was only a matter of time before he was discovered. Growing desperate, Sang-heon decided to bury the body and spent 2 days driving around in search of a quiet, isolated spot. His final choice was a park in Gajangdong, Osan City, about 9 kilometers from home. The area had few passers-by and no streetlights at night, making it a perfect place to dispose of a body. Finally, around 10 p.m. on June 28th, Sang-heon arrived at the park and initially planned to burn the suitcase containing the body. But the fire grew too large, and in a panic, he quickly put it out to avoid being reported. By then, the victim's toes had been exposed from the partially burned suitcase. Growing even more desperate, Sang-heon searched for a nearby empty lot. He dug into the ground, placed the suitcase inside, covered it with a bit of dirt, and fled the scene. After that, he returned to his normal life. To avoid suspicion and monitor police activity, he even accompanied his wife to the police station to report Hae-won's disappearance. But what he failed to consider was the CCTV cameras and bank transactions. These eventually exposed his poorly executed crime. On July 13th, police arrived at the park in Osan City based on the suspect's confession and discovered Choy Hae-won's remains. The body had been buried carelessly, with the victim's toes still visible above the dirt. With the body found and a confession recorded, the case seemed to be concluded. But then, a shocking twist occurred. One day before being handed over to prosecutors, Sang-heon suddenly changed his statement. He claimed that it was not him, but his wife who had orchestrated everything. He alleged that the sisters had a bad relationship due to financial disputes, and that he had only killed his sister-in-law at his wife's request. He was now trying to shift the blame onto his innocent wife. Now, his grieving wife, who had just lost her sister, was also dragged into questioning due to her husband's false accusations. She firmly denied any involvement, and even underwent a lie detector test. Of course, there was no evidence linking her to the crime. In fact, the money from the car sale was never given to her. Sang-heon had spent it all himself. Ultimately, it was confirmed that this was a crime committed entirely by Sang-heon alone. In January 2014, the first trial was held. The court ruled that his crime was unforgivable, as he had not only committed murder but also tried to shift the blame onto his own wife. As a result, he was given a severe sentence, 25 years in prison. Sang-heon immediately appealed. He emphasized that the murder was impulsive and requested a reduced sentence. However, the prosecutor argued that this was a premeditated crime. The evidence was clear. From early morning, he had waited until all family members left the house. Between 11 a.m. and 1 p.m., he committed the murder, cleaned up the crime scene, met an acquaintance to sell the car, and even sent messages to the family. Given his quick and calculated actions, was this truly just a spur-of-the-moment act of rage? During the appeal trial, the court focused on the fact that after the murder, Sang-heon spent 2 days searching for a burial site. They argued that if this had been a premeditated murder, he would have chosen the location beforehand. As a result, they concluded that the crime was impulsive and reduced his sentence to 20 years in prison. Sang-heon appealed once again, claiming the ruling was unfair, but the Supreme Court upheld the 20-year sentence. This means he is currently serving time in a domestic prison and is expected to be released in 8 years, in 2033, at the age of 51. Despite being convicted, Sang-heon has never shown remorse and has never apologized to the victim's family. This alone speaks volumes about the cruelty of this murderer. A 20-year sentence seems far too lenient. Even worse, the fact that he falsely accused his own wife is the most shocking part of this case. I can't help but wonder, does a person like him truly deserve any admiration? It's truly bitter to think about. But of course, justice is for the law to decide. Sang-heon, once a promising basketball player, earned recognition and high expectations from others due to his natural talent. But through this case, we have learned that talent alone does not make someone great. Sang-heon has completely fallen from grace. He will no longer be remembered as basketball prodigy Sang-heon, but instead as murderer Sang-heon. This concludes our first case. Coming up next, case number 2. In 2015, in a studio apartment in Otaidong, Gumi City, Gyeongsangbuk-do Province, a 24-year-old man named Song Do-hyun and his 32-year-old girlfriend Kim Da-hee, who was 8 years older than him, were living together. They had not been dating for long, but they seemed to get along well and had just started living together. However, the way they met was quite unusual. In fact, Do-hyun already had a girlfriend, 27-year-old Cho So-min, who was now his ex. And his current girlfriend, Da-hae, was actually one of So-min's closest friends. This situation originated in 2014, when Do-hyun and his ex-girlfriend were still a couple. At that time, So-min introduced her friend Da-hae, saying, "This is my close sister-like friend." The three of them quickly became close and often spent time together. Later, however, So-min began preparing for the civil service exam. Naturally, she spent less time with her boyfriend, and eventually, they broke up. A few months after the breakup, she received a shocking piece of news. Her ex-boyfriend, Do-hyun, and her best friend, Da-hae, had started dating. At the time, So-min felt deeply betrayed. Kim Da-hae was someone she had trusted more than anyone, yet in the blink of an eye, she had started dating her ex-boyfriend. It felt like Da-hae had completely disregarded their friendship. Moreover, the timing of the relationship, not long after the breakup, made So-min extremely upset and furious. From that moment on, So-min began talking badly about the couple to her friends. It seemed like she was trying to vent her anger that way, but her resentment only grew stronger. Still bitter and furious, So-min eventually posted on social media, targeting the couple with sarcastic remarks like, "An older woman dating a guy 8 years younger than her. A young guy dating a woman 8 years older than him." This post quickly reached Do-hyun and Da-hae, making both of them angry in their own ways. From Do-hyun's perspective, he was completely frustrated. "Hey, I didn't cheat on her. I clearly ended my relationship before I started dating my new girlfriend. What did I do wrong?" He couldn't understand why his ex-girlfriend was bad-mouthing them. On the other hand, Da-hae had a different reaction. She began questioning why So-min was so furious. She thought, "Why is my boyfriend's ex-girlfriend this mad? Could there be another reason?" Doubt began creeping in. Could my boyfriend have been two-timing? Did he meet me before their relationship was over? She wanted to confirm this directly with her boyfriend. When she asked him, Do-hyun was defensive. "That's ridiculous. Why would you even think that?" He expressed his frustration at being doubted. At this point, Do-hyun felt he could no longer let this situation with his ex continue. It was damaging his relationship with his current girlfriend and making him look like the bad guy in the eyes of his friends. Determined to clear things up, the Song-Kim couple decided to meet So-min in person. They invited her to their home, intending to explain the situation and even demand an apology for spreading rumors and attacking them on social media. So, on June 23, 2015, Cho So-min received a call from the couple and stepped into their home. As she opened the door, she faced Do-hyun and Da-hae, who were now openly declaring their love for each other. What an awkward situation, right? One was her ex-boyfriend, and the other was her former best friend, whom she had personally introduced to her boyfriend. Naturally, there were no warm feelings between them. So, the moment So-min saw Da-hae, her former best friend who was now dating her ex, she confronted her directly, saying, "How could you do this to me?" Hearing this, Kim Da-hae wasn't about to back down either. "What did I do wrong? You two already broke up. Let's clear this up once and for all today." Harsh words were exchanged back and forth. The conversation didn't de-escalate at all. Instead, it turned into a heated argument, full of raw emotions, until Da-hae suddenly raised her hand and slapped So-min across the face. It was an unexpectedly violent move. From So-min's perspective, she must have thought, "I'm already humiliated enough, and now she dares to hit me." Overcome with rage, she immediately declared that she would call the police. Her emotions flared, and she frantically reached for her phone. Seeing this, Do-hyun quickly rushed over. Perhaps wanting to protect his current girlfriend, he grabbed So-min's phone and threw it far away, effectively stopping her from calling the police. At that moment, everything changed. Do-hyun, a former kickboxer, began brutally beating Cho So-min. And here's a crucial fact. Do-hyun was no ordinary man. He had years of martial arts training. His kicks were stronger than most people could ever handle. He was physically superior to the average adult, and now, this former fighter was using his strength against So-min, a defenseless woman. So-min couldn't fight back. She was physically small and completely unprepared for this sudden, terrifying attack. She never imagined that stepping into this house would lead to such a nightmare. After all, no matter what had happened, these were people she once trusted, her ex-boyfriend and her former best friend. She never saw it coming. But now, under Do-hyun's relentless assault, she was completely powerless. Her phone was taken, the doors were locked, and there was no one around to help. There was no escape. At that moment, her pain wasn't just from the beating, she was overwhelmed by sheer terror. Will I even make it out of here alive? Meanwhile, Do-hyun had completely lost control. His rage exploded, and he continued punching and kicking So-min's entire body. He repeatedly struck her face, delivering vicious blows with his fists and feet. He even stomped on her body. And then, he delivered the final devastating move, a knee kick. This was a deadly martial arts technique, where the attacker drives their knee directly into the opponent's face. Even in a professional fight, this move could be lethal. A trained fighter like Do-hyun knew exactly what he was doing. He knew how dangerous this move was. But something in his mind snapped, and he drove his knee straight into So-min's face. Bam! She couldn't dodge it. The impact sent her crashing down, completely drained of strength. At the same time, her head slammed hard against the kitchen glass door, splitting her scalp open. And do you know what Da-hai did during all of this? You might think she would try to stop her boyfriend, right? Nope. Once So-min collapsed, Da-hai joined in and began beating her as well. She kicked So-min in the stomach, joining her boyfriend in the brutal attack. Meanwhile, Song Do-hyun, still filled with rage, kicked her randomly, in the face, in the neck. At this point, it no longer looked like an attack, it looked like an execution. Blood began to trickle down from the wound on her head. Her face was so swollen that she could no longer open her eyes or speak. In unbearable pain, she tried to open her mouth and whispered, "Help me." It was a weak, desperate cry, but for some reason it triggered something inside Do-hyun. "Help you? Number, I'm going to kill you." Then both of them continued beating her until So-min completely lost consciousness. And this wasn't just a few minutes. It lasted for 4 hours. 4 hours of continuous, brutal torture. In the end, So-min was left unconscious. At this point, the couple finally started to panic. "She's not dead, is she?" For a brief moment, it seemed like they realized the severity of what they had done. But then, something even more disturbing happened. Instead of calling for help, they got hungry. After spending hours beating a defenseless woman, they decided to go out for food. They cleaned up, left the apartment, and went out to eat, leaving So-min alone, battered and dying. At this point, her body was covered in bruises, her ribs were shattered, and she couldn't move. The knee kick to her head had caused severe brain damage, leaving her completely unresponsive. The horrific scene was only discovered because of a neighbor. After hours of continuous noise, a neighbor began wondering what was happening and called the police. When officers arrived, they found So-min had already stopped breathing. The cause of death was a brain hemorrhage due to severe head trauma. One of the investigators on the scene later said, "She was beaten like a punching bag." Imagine how horrific her condition must have been. Once her body was discovered, police immediately identified Do-hyun and Da-hai, the two people who lived in the apartment, as the main suspects and launched a manhunt. By early morning, both of them were arrested while casually strolling through a nearby park. The most shocking part? They didn't even deny it. They were arrogant about it. "Yes, we did it." A former athlete and his girlfriend had brutally murdered his ex-girlfriend, a case that shocked the entire nation. When police asked, "Why did you do this? Why did you leave her to die?" their answer was unbelievable. "Officer, she posted bad things about us on social media." That was their motive for murder. The lead investigator couldn't believe what he was hearing and had to ask again, "Are you telling me you killed someone over a social media post?" The murderers were firm in their response. At the time of the crime, their hatred and rage towards So-min had grown so uncontrollable that they felt like they had no other choice. The prosecutor charged Song Do-hyun with murder and Kim Da-hae with assault resulting in death. The key point here is that the charges for the two were different. First, the fact that Do-hyun was a former kickboxer played a significant role. Of course, under current law, even if the perpetrator is an athlete, there is no specific provision for harsher punishment. However, when an athlete attacks a regular person, intent is recognized more clearly. This means there is a higher chance of a severe sentence because he fully understood how much damage his blows could cause, yet he still chose to act with extreme brutality. During the investigation, the prosecutor asked Do-hyun, "Did you think that if you kept beating So-min, she might die?" Do-hyun coldly responded, "I thought she would die." On top of that, he attempted to justify himself, saying, "Just looking at her face made me furious. At that moment, I thought even if she died, I wouldn't care." Because of this clear and damning confession, the prosecutor was able to charge him with murder, which is a much more severe crime than assault resulting in death. On the other hand, in Kim Da-hae's case, her acts of violence were not considered to have directly endangered So-min's life. Because of this, she was charged with assault resulting in death, which legally means that she participated in the beating but did not intend to kill. Now, all that was left was the final sentencing. During the prosecutor's investigation, Do-hyun had openly admitted to his intent to kill. But the moment he stepped into the courtroom, his attitude completely changed. Suddenly, he backtracked and said, "I really didn't know she would die." He repeated this over and over, trying to lessen his sentence. Perhaps he had realized that just a single statement could make a huge difference in his punishment. But fortunately, the court didn't buy it. No matter what he said, the bruises covering So-min's body were undeniable proof of the prolonged and severe violence she endured. How could anyone do something like that to another human being for 4 hours straight? Thus, the court recognized that Do-hyun had latent intent to kill. The term latent intent, also known as indirect intent, is a legal concept that refers to a situation where a person is aware that their actions could result in a criminal outcome, but still chooses to proceed. This term often appears in court cases, so understanding its definition can be useful. To clarify, let's look at an example. If someone swings a bat at another person's head repeatedly, they might not explicitly say they want to kill that person, but they know full well that such an attack could be fatal. That is latent intent. The person knows the possible outcome, but does it anyway. During the trial, another shocking fact was revealed. Do-hyun already had a prior record. While working as a kickboxer, he had previously used a knee kick on a civilian, causing them to collapse. But instead of stopping, he continued attacking them. In the end, the victim lost consciousness, but Do-hyun did not provide any aid, did not call 911, and simply walked away. For this crime, he had only received 3 months of probation and had to compensate the victim. This mindset can only be described as arrogant and utterly ruthless, a mentality that says, "I don't care if the victim dies." Regardless, the final verdict for this case was, Song Do-hyun was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Kim Da-hae was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Both appealed the decision, but the court upheld the original ruling. The exact criteria for the sentencing in this case were not disclosed. Of course, in reality, even serial killers in South Korea rarely receive the death penalty. So, expecting a harsher sentence for Song Do-hyun was unrealistic. However, what about Kim Da-hae's 3-year prison sentence? This case happened a decade ago, in 2015. That means Kim Da-hae has already served her time and may have returned to normal life. For the victim's family, this must feel like a bitter reality. After all, she was an accomplice. The perpetrators and the victim in this case were once the closest of people, lovers and best friends. But the outcome was not just tragic, it was horrifying. Was there truly no other way to resolve their conflicts besides violence and murder? When the case became public, some people blamed the victim, arguing that she provoked the attack by damaging the perpetrator's reputation. But does any amount of online insults ever justify beating someone to death? Song Do-hyun will be released when he turns 40. By then, will he finally understand the gravity of his crime, or will he still believe he was the real victim? Let's discuss in the comments. See you next time.